All right, so welcome to MBA Mission presentation here on best practices for your business school interview. My name is John Sisk. I'll be walking you through this presentation, and obviously, I'm a senior consultant for MBA Mission. This is always the end of our engagement with clients. And I think, this is always the completely stress-free and fun experience of going through an interview in the business school application process. Usually you get to the end of this process and you get that email or you check your application portal and you'll see, oh my God, I got an interview, right? And then that feeling sinks in and you go, oh my God, I got an interview. What do I do now? So this morning, that's what we're going to be walking through, giving you, like I said, some good advice and guidance on how to navigate this process as we get going. So I'm going to pull up a screen here for you and we can get rolling with MBA Mission's presentation. So how to prepare for your interview. MBA Mission presentation here, trying to get you ready for your business school interviews that you'll have at the end of the process. Again, my name is John Sisk. I'm a senior consultant with MBA Mission. I've been working with the firm for coming up on 6 years now, and worked with all kinds of clients in all kinds of situations. And obviously, this is one of my most enjoyable parts of the process with my clients, because this is where a lot of people need some help, right? And you as well. If you're watching this, probably looking for some tips and guidance on how to best present yourself and obviously control the narrative, control the message. That's what we'll be talking about today. So as we think about what we'll be going through, first of all, we'll talk about just an overview, build a foundation in terms of how to approach the process, and just some initial pointers when you get that initial notification of the interview, basically how not to freak out. That's what I always like to say. And then what kinds of interviews are there? There are multiple formats of interviews that you'll need to be familiar with. And obviously each of them comes with their own nuances and quirks, and we'll be walking through all of those. How you can prepare, our third section, and of course, what questions will they ask, the fourth section, which I'm sure you are extremely interested in. And then a little bit about MBA Mission at the end. So let's start off with foundation. Let's talk about what you should be thinking about when you get that initial invitation for your interview. So first of all, really important to remember, and I think it's hard to remember this sometimes, that interviews are rarely high-stress situations, right? When you walk into an interview, yes, you might be nervous, you might feel stressed, but I think it's really important to remember, you get in the room, how often have you actually been in an interview where you felt like it was a high-pressure situation and the interviewer was really, putting you on notice or putting you on edge? Doesn't happen very often, right? The questions are generally fairly generic, and I always say an interview should be an enjoyable experience because they're just asking about you, and that goes to the second point here. Remember, the goal is to be yourself. Let your personality come through. There's no reason that you should be trying to put on some sort of show or some sort of facade of someone you are not. That's not what you're trying to do here, and we'll obviously touch on that throughout this presentation. Building a rapport. Interview rarely being high stress. Well, one thing you got to be trying to do in that interview is build the relationship, build that rapport with your interviewer or interviewers as you go through. We want to make sure that your personality shines through and you have a connection so that they feel a connection to you, and obviously are rooting for you by the end of the interview. And then finally, remember, and I think this is the most important thing for business school applicants who make it this far in the process to remember, an interview is not make or break. That is not how the process works in these admissions offices. Let's say you get to the end of the interview and you think you just bombed it. Well, I've had plenty of clients, applicants who think that they have bombed their 30-minute interview with a student, with an admissions officer, with an alum. And then what happens 2 weeks later? They get their acceptance letter, right? Same thing happens the other way. Sometimes you think you've nailed it, and all of a sudden you get that notification that you've been waitlisted or you didn't get in at all. You got to remember, these things are rarely make or break, because what happens is actually they will take one step back and put your name back into the pool of all the interviewees. And once they've done that, they will reassess who did well, who may not have done as well. And remember, it's just another data point. This is not sort of, I've made it this far, and now if I don't do well, I'm not getting in. That's just not the way that works. So if you remember those 4 things, then I think the next thing to think about is, what are the implications of that? Do not, I repeat, do not over-prepare. Over preparation is actually one of the big no-nos that we see among our clients. And the reason is really simple. It gets in the way of being yourself. They can't get to know the real you if you have over-prepared for an interview. They do not want a bunch of business school robots MBA robots to be marching through their campus the following fall. They want individuals. They want personalities. And again, if you are giving them these rehearsed, memorized answers, there's no way you can do that. Second thing, remember, the best way to present yourself, right, and to let your personality shine through is to know your story. And you've got to know your story. We're going to talk a lot about that in this presentation. And finally, being confident, not with the actual substance of the answers themselves, right? You don't have to be confident with how am I going to answer A, B, and C exactly down to the letter. But you do have to be confident about how you will answer those questions. That is what is ultimately crucial in the process. And again, we'll give you some frameworks as we get into section 3 and 4 on the back end of this presentation. So I think it's important, all of this, advice is really captured by D. Leopold, former director of admissions at HBS, who noted that once HBS applicants reached the interview stage, the interview decision is no longer about whether you're qualified, right? And I think you got to let that sink in for a second. Just think about that. And this is true across all schools. Once they've decided to interview you, they've decided you are qualified. It's not like now you have to prove yourself all over again. The application did the trick. It got you in the door. You are now speaking with, like I said, an admissions officer, an alum, a student, whoever it might be. But they're not going to interview you unless they think you have potential to be a part of the incoming class that following fall. So just remember, they already know who you are. You don't need to impress them with a bunch of facts and figures. And if you do tell a story and it might not line up exactly with something you put in the application, don't worry. It's okay. That's not the goal. It's not a get you or gotcha situation. It's all about selection now. And that's what D. Leopold, again, former HBS admissions director, has said. It's all about, will they select you after they have decided you are qualified? Well, it's all about getting to know you, not an over-rehearsed version of you. Okay, so some big advice there. And now let's dive in to what kinds of interviews are there. So really 3 types of interviews. There are the applicant-initiated. There are the school-initiated, which you're probably most familiar with. It's the format that most people think of when they think of these interviews, waiting, patiently, waiting for that call or waiting for that email, I should say. And of course, the hybrid interview. So let's talk about these 3 types. First of all, the applicant-initiated. Applicant-initiated interviews are where the applicant would send a message to the school to schedule or set up an interview. And the best example of this is Kellogg. Kellogg invites all of their applicants to do this, and you can set it up at your convenience. This is really a great format for people who are strong in person, right? If you know that you have a great personality, if you know that you are going to wow someone, just sitting in a room with them and having a conversation, you got that charisma. This is the interview for you, right? Kellogg is a great place to apply because Kellogg gives you that opportunity. gives that opportunity to everyone, I should say. At the same time, I think it's important to remember that you do not have to submit an application in advance. You can actually meet with Kellogg at any point in the application process. So for instance, if you're applying for their round 2 deadline in January, if a round 1 visit in September or October is what fits your schedule best, you can do that. However, word of caution, it's important to remember that once you've done the application, you will probably be better at interviewing. And that's because the application forces you to answer certain questions about yourself and do some self-reflection. That's really important in the interview process. So you can go anytime, but just make sure you know your story. That second point there here on the slide. And then finally, just a quick note, just because everyone gets an interview with the applicant-initiated format, again, that Kellogg has, and they're most famous for it, remember that the interview is no less relevant, right? This is still a huge opportunity for you, and it won't be counted any differently, or discounted, I should say, by Kellogg just because everyone gets one. Okay. Now, let's move on to school-initiated interviews. This is, of course, the typical situation in which, like I said, you've submitted your application, and now 4 to 8 weeks later, you get a notification via email, maybe in the online application portal, that you have received an interview. So again, you have to submit an application in order to receive the interview in this case. And remember, like I mentioned at the very outset of this presentation, it's important, but it is not the decisive aspect of this interview process. It is just another data point. So once you get in there, you think about maybe you have 100 applicants, 50 get interviews, and 25 are accepted. Of course, that would be a huge acceptance rate, but let's just go with it. 25 get accepted. They are not just accepting 25 of those 50 interviewees based on the interview alone. They all go back into that pool of 50 interviewees, and then they reassess, reevaluate, and use the interview as the data point. It is not the deciding factor in your application decision. And again, this is the format that most, or the type of interview that most schools employ. HBS, Wharton, Columbia, Darden, Stanford, Stern, Cornell, on and on and on, most of them. And finally, you have a hybrid format. So the hybrid type of interview, in terms of initiating it, is a situation in which there is effectively an open interview period where a school, and in this case, the two most famous schools that do this would be Fuqua and Tuck, Duke and Tuck. And what they'll do here is actually give you an opportunity to schedule an interview, just like Kellogg does, except there's a deadline in this case. So up through, let's say for Tuck, up through early January, you can schedule an interview. And then after January 5th rolls around, that deadline is gone. And then they will invite other people who have not come to campus for an interview. They'll invite you if they feel like your application was strong enough. But again, I always say with these hybrid types of interviews, where you have the open enrollment period, open interview period, certainly take advantage of it if you can get to campus and you feel like you're strong in interviews. All right, so you've got the types of interviews in terms of how they will initiate or schedule interviews with you. We then have some different interviewers, right? So there are really 3 types of people who could interview you. The first is going to be an admissions officer, which is probably the most familiar. Second is going to be a student, current student on campus. And the third is going to be an alum, most likely off campus. So we'll start with the most common, the admissions officer. So couple of points to make here. Admissions, a lot of times I'll be working with clients and they'll say, John, I was only able to meet with a current student. They didn't let me meet with an admissions officer. Do you think that that's going to hurt my candidacy? Not at all, right? Admissions officers, it's obviously great to get in front of admissions officers, but it's certainly not going to hurt you if you wind up being interviewed by a current student, because those students are trained by the admissions officers, right? The only difference between an admissions officer interview and a student interview, which we'll cover in just a second, is really the questions that you might ask. right? Think about with the admissions officer, you're not really going to be able to ask questions such as, well, tell me about your experience as a student on campus, right? You're not going to be able to sort of establish that rapport in terms of that common experience that you would both have, you as a future student and obviously the current student in their current situation. So just remember the kinds of questions you ask would be a little bit different. With an admissions officer, you might ask, what would you, this would be a very vague or broad question, but might be a nice softball for them to sort of get the conversation going. What do you think in your experience working here? What do you think really separates this program from the other marketing programs out there? Something like that, right? It might be a good question. And we'll talk about the kinds of questions you might ask later. You can see a list of schools here. Some of them are AdCom only. HBS, Stern, and Sloan only use admissions officers. Others use both admissions officers and students. Moving on to the student interviews. So, I always think it's funny because, you've gone through this process. You are, stressed, obviously, going into the interview, but you're wearing your suit, you're wearing your tie, you're in there waiting in the waiting room, and then all of a sudden, who do you see walk out to grab you but a second-year student who's got, his jeans on, untucked shirt, backpack, maybe a bottle of water. He says, just follow me, let's get in here, right? And you're thinking, geez, God, why would they do this to me? And the fact of the matter is, like I said, current students, just as strong in terms of their interview abilities. They are trained. These schools would not invite you to campus to interview and then decide, no, we're not going to really take this guy seriously, or we're not going to take the applicant seriously. That's just not the way it works. Students are trained, and you might even be in a better situation if you like working with your peers versus your managers. Think about it that way. A student actually could be a good situation because you can establish a rapport with them, just a couple years older than you, most likely. Questions that you might ask your interviewer in this situation, if you think about it, you can actually probe their experiences a little bit, which is really nice. So you can ask them, why did you make the decision to come here? Why did you, why did you, or how did you interview, not how did you interview in the process, but how did you navigate certain recruiting, processes over the last year? What was your internship like? What kinds of recruiting resources do they have here? What clubs are your favorites? Those sorts of questions. And I think those are really nice. So sometimes interviewing with a student can actually work to your advantage and work in your favor. And finally, alumni interviews. So you could get an interview with an alum, and you can see a list of schools here that do this. They use alumni and or admissions officers to go through this. Now, alumni, this is really the wild card of the bunch, right? They do get some training from the admissions offices, but there's obviously less consistency. Alumni are sometimes spread out, right? One of the reasons you might meet with an alum is because they are local in your market and you're not able to travel to campus, or that's what they want, right? You're applying to an East Coast school, but you're based on the West Coast. They might have you meet with someone in the Bay Area or SoCal. So if you think about it, the training is not nearly as consistent. You could wind up with a strange situation. Could be good, could be bad. Some alums are extremely easy to interview with, right? Because they're maybe very laid back. You get a cup of coffee, you might get lunch, or you might meet them in their office, and they might be in the middle of a really crazy day. It's a situation in which they don't give you the attention you feel like you deserve, right? So we've had all kinds of situations. And I think it's important to just remember, it's rare that you get a bad alumni interview, but your questions, and again, the approach that you would take with an alum would be different. Your interviewer in this case probably does not know exactly what's happening on campus these days, but they can discuss the alumni experience. And I would keep your questions near the end of the interview and keep the conversation focused or geared more towards what their experience was like back when they were on campus in their day. So we now move on to the different formats. Again, types of interviews. We've talked about how they're initiated. We've talked about who the interviewer might be. Now let's talk about the formats that you could see. There are really 4 formats that are currently out there. Schools use them in different combinations. There's a blind interview. There is an applied interview. Applied really is just non-blind. There's a group interview. And increasingly, we're seeing a lot of programs using video interviews. So let's walk through all of these as we go. So a blind interview. What does that mean? It means that your interviewer will have no knowledge of your application at all. They have not read any of your essays. They haven't read your recommendation letter. They likely have not seen your resume. They may or may not have. Depends on how quickly they got to the admissions office before interviewing you. But the bottom line is the blind interview, they don't know anything about you. They don't even have your GPA or GMAT. And you can think about what that means in terms of your going into the interview. It means that they really don't have any preconceptions about who you are. And so again, this goes back to what I said right at the beginning. The interview is just another data point. They're not thinking, oh, this applicant, he or she is so great. I've read their application and now this is it. They've got to nail this interview. They don't know anything about you. So you're either going to do well in the interview, you might not do so well, but it's just another data point. And that's why so many of these schools, as you can see, a list of them at the bottom here, do blind format interviews. Open-ended questions. That is what you will see for the most part in a blind interview. What types of leadership roles do you take on teams? What are your strengths and weaknesses? We'll go through those questions in a few minutes. Very open-ended questions because they don't know anything about you. And so it's really tough for them to dig too deep if they don't know anything about your application. You can see here what a sample interview sequence might look like. So walk me through your resume, just sort of kick things off, get a nice intro. What are your goals right after school? What are your long-term goals, 10, 20 years out? Why do you want to go to business school now? As you go through, maybe you get some behavioral sprinkled in near the bottom. Tell us about a challenging leadership experience. What would your coworkers say about you? Again, you can see these questions are they're almost all like icebreakers because they don't know anything about you. And that's where your preparation will come in handy, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. Let's talk about non-blind interviews. We call them applied here. They can go by either term. So the interviewer in this case will have read your application thoroughly, and they've probably developed a list of questions. Now, this is not an inquisition, it's not an interrogation, but they will know about you, which can actually lead to a really nice conversation. And you can see the 4 primary programs that do this, HBS, LBS, Sloan, and Stern. They know about you going in, these admissions officers. And so the interview, just remember, they've read your essays. They have read your recommendation letters. They know about you. And so when they meet with you, a question would be a little bit more pointed. They dig a little bit deeper. And you can see the kinds of questions here that they would ask. So for instance, you moved from Goldman Sachs to Google. How did you adjust to working in such different cultures? Right? That's a question you probably wouldn't see in a blind interview because they just saw your resume, or they hadn't read your profile, obviously. Or thinking about the more digging in, and HBS is notorious for this, digging into your story and seeing, what's really underneath the hood. They like to pop the hood open and see what's inside this guy's head, this applicant's head. And you think about other questions they are asking about, obviously, certain experiences, projects, engagements you had at work. They'll take bullet points off your resume, stories you've used from your essays, and ask you follow-up questions just to see what's behind all of this. Was this a manufactured product, the application, or is there something else that this applicant is bringing to the table? Group interviews. We have seen group interviews. For the most part, the group interview, the most famous one right now, is the Wharton team-based discussion. Wharton is really interesting because a few years ago, they had one-on-one interviews, just like everyone else, for many years. And their admissions committee, really their admissions director, had decided that their one-on-one interviews really weren't telling them anything about their applicants. sort of felt like it was a waste of their time, wasn't a good use of their time at least. And so they decided to get rid of interviews altogether. And people said, whoa, 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 we want something, right? Applicants obviously wanted something because they want a chance to get face-to-face. And so they installed and they developed the team-based discussion. And this is a small group discussion on an assigned topic that they give you beforehand. It's a 45-minute session observed by admissions officers and students, sometimes alums, but mostly admissions officers and students. And if you think about this process, what they're really trying to get at is not the substance of your response to their topic prompt, their question that they ask you, which is usually something about a program that you might develop for Wharton's curriculum or the broader program extracurriculars. What they're trying to get at is how you interact with others, right? They're observing you in a group setting. Do you cut people off? Do you allow other people to get their opinions in? Are you someone who is collaborating to make sure everyone's voices are heard? On and on and on. But again, the primary focus for Wharton, and really any group interview or group exercise, I should mention Ross also does a group exercise. The entire point is to see how you interact with others. Why? Really important, because that's what business school is all about. Group projects, clubs, class discussions. They want to know that you interact well with people. And of course, that is one of the primary skill sets that you're going to have in any career that you take on business-wise after business school. So here we go, a Wharton interview prompt, just to give you a sense of what they're looking for. So you can see here, they're talking about the global initiative's focus on educating and creating knowledge to provide students, faculty, and alumni to lead, necessary tools to lead in the global environment. So what they ask all of the applicants, the interviewees, to do in this situation is to imagine that their Vice Dean for Global Initiatives at Wharton is asking for their recommendations on a new global modular course. And you'll basically be tasked with coming up with a 1-minute presentation to the rest of your team. They go around this group of 5 to 7 people. You sort of toss your idea out there, and then you collaborate on coming together with some sort of form, some sort of combination of all your ideas together in order to come up with the best idea. And again, they're watching to see how you do. And you can see that the co-founder of Wharton's team-based discussion had very simple advice for all of the interviewees in the process: to just enjoy the discussion, relax. And by the way, I think that's good advice for any interview, but especially the group interview. Don't stress. You're not trying to one-up the other applicant next to you, right? You're not going to gain points by one-upping them or making them look bad. Just enjoy yourself. And there's really not a lot you can do to prepare specifically. You just have to be yourself and make sure that you are obviously working with others in a collaborative way. Video interview. All right, so let's talk about the video interviews. These are increasingly being used by programs to get a sense of an applicant's personality. Again, these are just data points. You cannot do one of these video interviews and bomb it, and that's it. It's over. Oh my God, I answered that Kellogg question with the dumbest answer ever. I'm not going to get in. No, just not the way it works, right? These interviews, just to give you a sense of how they're done, they are due after you've submitted your application, usually within 1 week. They'll send you all the instructions, the video portal, and all of the specifics on how to access it and give you the instructions, like I said. The applicant will log on to a video website and answer questions. With Yale, they have 3. With Kellogg, they have 3. With INSEAD, they have 4 questions. The applicants are allowed to practice first and then receive the first question. You want to make sure that video equipment is working before you dive into the questions. You'll have 20 seconds to prepare for Yale and INSEAD, and you have 90 seconds for Kellogg. 60 seconds to answer, and then an additional question, if applicable, after you give your video answer. So we have some great resources mbaMIssion does, giving you some examples of how this works. Definitely encourage you to check these video resources out on our website. Couple of sample questions that you can see here. Yale sample sequence. If your friends were to describe your strengths and weaknesses, what would they be? You can see that's more of a personality question. Describe a difficult problem that required you to come up with a creative solution. So again, this is a little bit of a behavioral, and it could come from professional or sort of outside of work. And then more of a value statement question. Tell us about your view on the following statement: without arts and education cannot be accomplished. Good luck with that one, right? It's a big question, but they just want to see that you can develop a point of view quickly and communicate clearly. The answer to that question, again, the substance of the question, or your answer, excuse me, is not as important, nearly as important as your ability to quickly formulate some thoughts and communicate them. Same thing with Kellogg, same thing with INSEAD. Kellogg sequences, if you had an extra hour every day, how would you spend it? All right, this is what they call the icebreaker question. We've seen this consistently through their years of doing this video exercise. Second question is usually a behavioral question. So what piece of technology could you not live without, and why, right? And you think about that, that could also be a little bit of a icebreaker as well. Behavioral question, you know, again, we'll go through some behaviorals in a little bit, but the behavioral question in general, something along the lines of, you know, tell us about a time when, right? So tell us about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. Tell us about a time when you had to lead from behind at work, something like that. What path are you interested in pursuing? How will you get there? And why is this the right program for you? This is a standard question. It's the third question that they will ask, and it's asked of all applicants. This is the one where you can actually prepare. I would not encourage you to memorize your answer. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, know the answer to the question, just don't over-rehearse. And then you can see INSEAD has 4 questions, similar to both Yale and Kellogg. Definitely encourage you, again, do your homework, do your research, know the kinds of questions so that you know how to approach these questions no matter what you get. Let's talk about how you can prepare for your interviews. So, enter the mindset of your interviewer, right? What does the interviewer really want to get out of their meeting with you, right? So, number one, is this person likable? You know, is the applicant someone that they would envision as a valuable member and a fun, all-around, you know, well-rounded personality as part of the class of 2019, 2020, right? They are trying to get a sense of whether or not you would be a nice fit with the rest of the applicant pool. Second thing they're thinking about, are you who you say you are on paper? So they'll have your resume, right? Even in the blind interviews, they'll probably have your resume in front of them because they're looking at it as you walk through. They want to get a sense of, is this person, is the candidate, is this person really who they represent themselves as on paper? Especially important when you're talking about the applied interviews, the non-blind interview where the interviewer is actually already reviewed your application, reviewed your essays, reviewed your recommendation letters. Extremely important in this situation for you to be able to convey, yep, that's me. It's not just, again, something that I manufactured and it polished up on paper, and then you walk in and you have no idea what you wrote in that application. So are you who you say you are on paper? And finally, are you excited about the program? I actually think this is the most important. You know, at the end of the day, you know, I've worked with many clients over the years where they might not have had all the credentials. They might not have had the right or the right scores or the right experiences necessarily. However, when you go in there, if you get to the interview stage, if you can convey an unparalleled excitement, right? You are more excited about that program not only than any other program out there, but more than any other applicant they talk to that day, and you just bring a fresh energy and enthusiasm into that room, you've got a shot. You've got a good shot, right? I always say that there is no substitute for enthusiasm and energy in these meetings. So you've got to, again, as tough as it can be, try to put the nerves to the side, right? And try to alleviate whatever anxiety you're feeling, because that will inhibit your ability to show your excitement about the program. You're obviously excited. Don't let that come out as anxiety or nervousness. Instead, channel that excitement and energy into an enthusiastic personality and tone in the course of the interview. So how can you prepare? Do your homework. Do your homework. Know your story. Again, especially important for the non-blind interviews where your interviewer has actually read through your application. But just as important for the blind interviews. If you think about the interviews where you have the opportunity to visit or schedule the interview before you have applied. So for instance, Kellogg would be one of those, Tuck would be one of those. You have to know your story before you go in there. So I always say, it's good if you can submit first and then interview, because obviously you will already have your story fleshed out. But once you've done that, make sure you reread your essays. Look at your resume, right? You need to make sure that what you have in that application, by heart. And obviously, when you're putting together that application, you got to know your story inside and out, because you got to think about, what do you want the interviewer to remember about you, right? What were the details behind each bullet and each story? Refresh your memory before you go in. Number two, not only do you need to know yourself, which is obviously the most important part, you have to know the school. Check out the blogs, check out the school press releases, and obviously check out any additional resources you have about the program. That could come in the form of first-person research. So scour your networks, look for alumni, current students who have already been through the program. I think it's extremely important to have conversations with people and think about, who is the stronger applicant, the interviewee who's sitting there saying, well, I read something on a website, or the interviewee who says, I actually spoke with, Larry Smith, who's graduating next year, and he told me all about this great entrepreneurs club because of my own interest in venture capital, right? Well, you've actually proved to them right then and there you've done your homework. So again, do everything you can to learn about the program and internalize that going in. I should mention a quick plug here for mbaMIssion and our resources, our website. Visit our website and go to the guides tab. We have so many resources right there, free interview guides for most of these schools. And that gives you a great primer and 101 on a lot of these. And finally, in terms of doing your homework, practice, 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 but don't memorize. Use the mirror, use a friend, bounce some ideas, use mbaMIssion, right? That's what we're here for. We have mock interviews, mock interview service that you can sign up for, and time yourself. 30 minutes goes fast. You need to make sure that your answers are crisp and clean, 2 to 3 minutes per answer. If you're moving beyond 3 minutes, we've got issues because then you're only getting, really, think about it, 6, 7 answers in the course of 30 minutes if you're going beyond 3 minutes per answer. Practice your answers, know what you want to say, but don't memorize. You don't want to come off as a robot. Fastest way to think about how to tell your stories and ace the interview is to think about your stories through different lenses, right? I always tell my clients when we're doing our interview prep that, if you're sitting there trying to practice for every possible question that they could ask you, you're never going to be able to prepare, right? They could ask you, you could prepare for 10,000 questions, and then they could ask you the 10,001st question that you did not prepare for, right? We don't want that. That's not the way to do it. You don't prepare for questions. You prepare answers. Think about the stories that you want to convey in 30 minutes. Usually you'll have 4, 5, maybe 6 stories, professional, extracurricular, maybe personal, that you will want to convey in the course of a 30-minute interview, because you have a message about yourself that you want to get across. So I think this is a great example that you're looking at right here, thinking about how can your stories be applied to different questions that they could ask you. It certainly works for a lot of your behavioral questions, or behavioral stories, I should say. So, for instance, if you think about leading team members at work, well, leading team members at work could be applied to all kinds of behavioral questions. It could be, tell me about a time you led a difficult project. Okay, boom, you've got an answer, probably. Tell me about a time you had to lead someone who really wasn't pulling his or her weight. You've probably got an answer, right? You already have that answer in your back pocket ready to go about leading team members. Tell me about a time when you were tasked with learning a new project or learning on the job. Okay, well, I had never led a team before, and now I was really tasked with learning on the fly how to do that. All of those questions could work with the answer you've developed about leading your team. This is a more specific example. I love this one. This is thinking about an extracurricular situation. So you want to get across the fact that you spend 1 day a week tutoring inmates for the GED exam, right? Earning that degree. So you think about, how do you, get that story across? Well, it could actually apply to a lot of questions. How have you taught those who are junior to you? Well, you're teaching these inmates GED. Describe a role model. I actually met with one of these inmates, and he taught me a lot, about myself. He's a role model for me. Wow, that could blow him away, right? How will you contribute to our school? Well, I actually spent time tutoring inmates for the GED. I think I could actually tutor first-year students as a second year, or I could tutor my finance classmates, because finance classmates who don't have financial service experience, who have been in marketing, I can help them in our group projects. Think about all of these different applications for this one story. One important note here, only use one story one time per interview. You don't want to repeat yourself throughout the interview. Okay, let's get on to questions that they will ask you in the course of your 30 minutes. First of all, we'll walk through these, but think about it like this. With your applied interview, this is the non-blind interview. They've read your application. You know the answers. You know the answers because the questions will be very targeted, right? You work at Google, they're going to ask you, okay, how did you use, that 10% rule to your advantage to develop something? You know the answer to that question, right? If you think about the group interview, there is no answer, right? They're going to ask you a broad question, and then guess what? The interview is kind of going to evolve however it evolves. There is no wrong or right answer. There is no answer, not a lot of structure. The video interview and the blind interview. These are going to be open-ended questions. So there are a lot of possible answers and directions, but obviously, like we just talked about, you can prepare answers without knowing the questions that are coming. Okay, so with the blind interview, again, these are questions that you could see here. Walk me through your resume. Tell me about yourself. What should I know about you? This is generally the first question you're going to receive in a blind interview. I always say, you could certainly do this in a chronological way. But the main point here is you want to go 2 to 3 minutes. I think you should have 3 to 5 points or sound bites ready to go. And obviously, like I said, 2 to 3 minutes. Make sure you're on point in terms of your time. Practice, practice, practice this one. And then obviously, remember that everything you say here could lead to follow-up targeted questions. And so when you're thinking about walking through your resume, yes, you could do the chronological way, but I think there are some other ways to do this. So let's walk through it. Chronological approach would be, X years ago, I graduated from so-and-so school, and then you would follow through again, in a chronological fashion, highlighting your motivations for the career choices you've made and the key accomplishments you've made along the way. They will likely start digging into whatever you mentioned in that first answer, right? The other way to do this is to do more of a thematic approach, which would be to say something along the lines of, if you look at the top, half and the bottom half of my resume, there are really two driving forces behind, things I've done in my career, my activities, both professional and personal. A driving curiosity and a passion for creating results that I can personally touch and feel, right? Now, that's obviously a little bit more intangible answer. I can give you an example of what I used to do, before business school. I would always say, there's really two parts of my career so far. You can see I started my career at NBC. I was working in television production. And then I moved on after, I had been working in TV production for a few years and moved on into media buying and advertising with Starcom. So you can think about, I immediately established what I did, what I've done, right? Then you can dive back into, here's why I made the choices I made, and obviously highlight some of the accomplishments. And then, of course, there's the other approach, which is at work, you go into your answer, and then outside of work, I go into that answer. One nice approach I always tell my clients to use when it comes to the end of this answer, which a lot of people struggle with, is to say something along the lines of, I've now reached a point where, my career has taken me this far, where I've developed these skill sets, and I feel like I'm ready to take the next step in my career. And that's why I'm sitting here today, right? If you finish with saying, that's why I'm sitting here today, now what have you done? You've opened up the next line of questions about goals and why you are applying for your MBA. All right, why? Speaking of why are you applying for MBA? Why do you want to apply to our school? Why Kellogg, right? Why HBS? Why Haas? We have to think through actual reasons. So just some do's and don'ts here. Think about what you should be saying. So I know that starting a business will be challenging. Finding my feet while at school will be critical. I would apply to the incubator program in your school or in your program, so that I could launch and refine my concept for my business while I am in the program, with the help of the Entrepreneurs Club, with the help of the Entrepreneurs Competition, so that I can really bounce ideas off my classmates. You're giving very specific reasons. That is the name of the game with why do you want to attend our program. What do you not say? Your school has a great reputation for entrepreneurship. The network, it's great. You're ranked in the top 10, and that's important to me too. Okay, great. Do you know how many schools have entrepreneurship programs? How many schools' networks are great? And how many schools are ranked in the top 10? Year to year, different rankings, different publications. There's probably anywhere between 10 to 20 schools ranked in the top 10 over the course of a 5-year period across different publications. That is not the answer you want to give. You want to get specific and make sure that everything you're mentioning, specific resources, classes, clubs, professors, recruiting events, etc., have to be in your answer for the school you're applying to. This is where, again, you do your homework, know the school inside and out. What other schools are you applying to? This is a trap question if you've ever seen one. The worst thing you can do in this situation is to answer the question by saying, let's say you're applying to HBS. HBS asks you what other schools are you applying to, and you say, well, I'm applying to Stanford and Wharton. And the reason I'm applying to Stanford is it's just such a great program. I'm actually from the Bay Area, and I really like it out there. Wharton at the same time has just a great finance program, and obviously, that's what I want to do is get into VC. So I don't know how I could turn down Wharton. Whoa! Why are you talking about the other schools? Why are you talking about the other schools? The best way out of this trap question, what other schools are you applying to, is to immediately mention what other schools you've applied to, some peer schools. Mention, very briefly why you applied to all the schools, and then immediately pivot back to why Columbia, in this case, is your number one choice. So for instance, what other schools are you applying to? Well, I'm applying, obviously, here to Columbia, along with Wharton and Chicago. And it's really because all of these schools have outstanding finance programs, and obviously that's critical for me to join a hedge fund following graduation. But And here's the pivot. Here it comes. Columbia is my first choice because its location in New York is going to provide me immediate access to so many Wall Street professionals and alumni, et cetera, et cetera. Watch out for this question. Be ready to immediately go back to why do you want your MBA from this program, and why, more importantly, are they your number one choice? What are your goals? This has to be thoughtful. It's the same exact question almost as walk me through your resume. You've got to be able to answer the question in a very specific way. Think about this just like your personal statement. And this is why we ask you, and why I mentioned a few minutes ago, recommending reread your application, reread your essays. You want to make sure that your goals are crystal clear. So think about it like this. You got to articulate it. You got to communicate it. Here's what you should say. As a banker, I worked on a number of restructurings, typically with industrial firms. And while I worked on the financing side, I was impressed with the management teams that really came in and helped us solve these situations and righted the ship. So I'm hoping to join a rotational program at an industrial firm like GE or UTC, where I could start my career on a leadership track and position myself for moving into long-term goal. What you don't want to do. Well, I want to work at a firm like GE or UTC and ultimately rise to the ranks and become CEO one day. Okay, right? Why would you say it like that? We need context. We need background. Your interviewer, most likely you saw the number of blind interviews that we have out there. They probably won't know anything about you. You've got to give them that backstory in order for all of your goals to make sense. Behavioral questions. Very, very simple format here. Tell me about a time when, right? So tell me about a time you led a team. Tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. Tell me about a time you struggled on the job, right? Whatever these stories are, we recommend using the STAR format. You've probably heard this or heard about this in some form or fashion throughout your career or throughout your undergrad days getting ready for interviews. Situation, task, action, result, right? Very simple format. You set up the situation. When I started coaching kids soccer, I imagined it would be a lot of fun and games, of course. Situation, right? What I didn't imagine is that I would have parents calling my house complaining about each other's kids. Whoa, okay, so now we've sort of got the task. After a week of phone calls, I announced that we would be having a parents' meeting and laid out the parental rules of conduct, right? So what have you done here? You have set up the situation. What you don't want to do is give everything right at the beginning. Well, I was challenged when I coached kids, but I stood up to some tough parents. They ultimately listened to my reason, and everyone had a great time. Whoa, you just blew through your answer without setting anything up. We need the situation and task right at the outset before you get into your action and result. This is a really nice organizing tool to make sure you keep your answers straight as you're going through your answer. It actually helps keep you on track mentally when you sometimes lose your train of thought in the middle of these answers, which can sometimes happen. So let's go through an example of this all the way through. So situation. Well, about a year after I started at my company, I realized we had grown really fast. The accounting department had tripled in size, et cetera, et cetera. So I decided on my own that I needed to get back to, what the essence of the business had been in terms of the family. Situation established. Task. I thought about different ways to do that. I needed to figure out how to do that. So I finally hit on starting a department-wide intranet that would let us stay connected even while we were at client sites. You've set up the task, right? Action. So first, I sent out a survey asking what individual boards would want. Then I worked with IT to create this platform. And then I organized a launch event. You've just established the action. And finally, results. Today, we have 14 separate boards, ranging from recipe exchanges to technical advice, and every employee has logged in 4 times a week over the past year. It's really helped our team cohesiveness and really helped the morale across the entire team. Situation, task, action, result. Always a helpful, useful organizing tool. And if you employ this methodology, your interviewers are going to be extremely impressed. All right, everybody's favorite question. discuss a weakness. And you can see our friend here from the office, Michael Scott. Of course, his weakness is, I work too hard, I care too much. I think the meme here actually left out the last part. I work too hard, I care too much, and I'm too invested in my job. And of course, the follow-up question, well, what are your strengths? My strengths are my weaknesses, right? So this is the worst question. I hate this question, but you could get asked this question. We've developed a shorthand acronym here to remember how to approach these questions. We always think WISP is the way to go. Acknowledge a real weakness, the W. Tell us about the impact. Describe the impact of that weakness. Explain the steps that you've taken to improve. This is always the end of the answer. You've got to hit this. Steps you've taken to improve, and then demonstrate that improvement. Prove to us that you have actually gotten through it, right? Some examples of how you would go through this. So I tend to think and speak quickly, which I think is a plus in a lot of situations, but this quickness sometimes causes me to interrupt others, right? So this could be a nice weakness because you're actually thinking about something that you think is a strength, but might not be. It shows a level of self-awareness. Because of this, I can come across as dismissive, as though I'm not listening. Junior team members have felt like I don't hear or value their ideas. So now you're explaining in the impact why this is a weakness. Get to the, obviously, thinking through the steps you've taken to improve, the S. I got feedback in my mid-year review. I agreed it was accurate. I read up on techniques to remind myself to slow down. I even wore a rubber band on my wrist on meeting days and snapped it if I started to interrupt, right? So now you've explained what have you done to address your weakness after realizing the impact it was having on your team. And finally, proving that it's working, right? So now you're explaining the end of the story where several junior team members have noticed the difference too. Since you've worked on this, they've told you that your willingness to work on your weakness has made you more relatable and trustworthy with them. I also always mention one thing you can do with a business school interview that's really helpful, I think. Turn your weakness question into a question or an answer about why the business school is going to be so great for you. Think about resource on campus that might help you address a weakness. So in this case, I'm really excited about the leadership program, or the interpersonal leadership program, where I'll be able to develop my presentation skills, right? Maybe it's group projects, whatever it might be. Find some resources where you can talk about presentation skills. And again, whatever the weakness is, find a resource on campus, and then you can finish the answer by saying, and that's actually one of the main reasons I'm applying here. I know this school, I know this program will help me improve on that weakness. Okay. Blind and applied interview questions. What do you like to do for fun? Keep in mind, if you have a real hobby out there, you spend a lot of time doing it, don't be afraid to talk about it, right? I love to play basketball. I love to play pickup games with my friends. I'm going to talk about it, right? I want them to know that, hey, I'll probably be playing intramurals with my classmates over the next 2 years. They want human beings. They don't want two-dimensional students and professionals. They want three-dimensional human beings. So there's no right or wrong answer here. Be yourself, whether that's you've got a stamp collection, whatever it might be, whether it's something philanthropic, where you're going to the soup kitchen on the weekends, you're going to homeless shelters, whatever it might be. Let them know who you are outside of school, outside of work, obviously. Family, you take family vacations. If you're just recently married, if you have a kid, they want to hear about these things. They have kids too. They have families too. So please remember, there is no wrong or right answer here. You just need to be yourself. And then, again, I always say, if appropriate, like I mentioned, pick up basketball games. Try to tie your answer to one of the school's activities or resources. Right. So, I'm a member of my wine club. I have been for years. I grew up in the Bay Area. It's just part of my life. My family has always gotten me into that. I can't wait to join the wine club here. It's going to be a lot of fun teaching my classmates what I know and then learning from them as well. So, what questions should you be asking your interviewer? A couple of quick points here. It depends on the type of interviewer. Like we mentioned earlier, if you are interviewing with a current student, you can obviously ask them about their experiences. You know, that would be a situation where you say, what's your favorite club? Who's your favorite professor, et cetera, et cetera. If you're interviewing with an admissions officer, it's going to be a little bit different. You would be in a situation where you would ask for observations. You know, you say, something really struck me during my campus visit. The faculty and the students seem so close. They're on a first name basis. You know, I see them sitting together in the cafeteria. Would you say that that is something that's pretty common here on campus? It's sort of a layup question for your interviewer, right? So you'll be able to give them an opportunity to wax poetic about their program. Then you think about the situation where you're asking more specific questions. You've done your research. You know, the dean recently implemented this new program. How has that impact been felt on campus? Now they're saying, wow, this applicant really knows his or her stuff. Okay, what to do if you get stumped? Take your time. Don't panic. Take a sip of water. Ask for a minute to collect your thoughts. You're a human being. Remember, the idea here is not to be a perfect robotic MBA candidate. The idea is, can you express yourself in a genuine, authentic way? Make sure you're doing that. It's totally fine to take a beat. And remember, there is no right answer, right? You just need to respond intelligently, thoughtfully, and thoroughly to the questions being asked. And if you really are truly stumped and you just can't come up with an answer to anything, it's fine to just ask, yeah, maybe we'll come back to that. If we could just move on, that'd be great. Questions they will not ask. Questions you don't need to worry about. Explain the theory of relativity, right? I would explain it to you right here. I don't have the time, unfortunately. We're running up on time. But explaining theory of relativity, not going to be asked. They're not going to ask you technical questions. It's very, very unlikely, almost never seen. I can't remember a single instance where we've had a situation where a client was asked some sort of you know, technical question, especially important for you banking analysts or associates out there, or consultants, you know, who have been through case interviews or technical interviews with investment banking or consulting. Not going to be like that. Most of these are behavioral, and at the end of the day, there's really the question they want to know is, who are you and why do you want to come to our program? So unless there is something specific in your profile, you know, in this case, maybe you know, you have some sort of social impact experience, and they want to ask you about what are your perspectives on, you know, the economic policy of a foreign country. Maybe that might happen, but they would only ask that in the event that they see that on your resume and they know that's something you would know about. Okay, some odds and ends to wrap things up here. Should you ask for feedback? Probably not. You send a thank you note, obviously, and that's our last point here. Send a thank you note, I always say within 24 hours. Thank you email is just fine. Don't ask for feedback. You should just be thanking them very briefly, a couple of sentences, maybe mention you enjoyed the conversation, and thank them so much for their perspective on the program. But feedback is not something you want to ask about. What should you wear? I always say business formal. There's no reason to dress down for these things. You will not look foolish if you are wearing a suit and a tie. Obviously, if you're on campus, that's absolutely what I would do. If you are off campus, maybe meeting with someone in a coffee shop on a weekend, maybe it's certainly a blazer and some dress pants, some slacks, no jeans, no jeans. We do not want to be so informal here. Business casual, maybe. I always say business formal is the way to go. And real quick, interview is at Starbucks. Who should pay? I always recommend to my clients, get there 15, 20 minutes early. Go ahead and get yourself a drink by yourself so you don't wind up in an awkward situation where you're asking someone about who should pay. If you both get there at the same time and you see them, I would actually offer to pay for their drink. They will most likely turn you down, and they'll probably offer to pay it for you. But get there early, and I think that's a good rule in general anyway. So I hope you found this presentation helpful. Couple of quick things about mbaMIssion itself and how we can help you along the way in the process. mbaMIssion, we are the only admissions firm out there with full-time consultants. This is not a night job, a weekend job for us. We do this full-time. So number one, think about that. You know, how well could you do your job if you were just doing it part-time? We have unprecedented collaboration. We have weekly team meetings. We have an annual conference every May. right before the season kicks off. So we know each other really well. We're a team of about 20 to 25 folks who know each other personally. I think that makes a huge difference when it comes to intelligence gathering and really best practices, sharing out our client stories among the group and always applying those to our current clients. I think it's also important to remember that we select our clients from 1%. We are selected, excuse me, from 1% of applicant pool of MBAs. So we have ongoing training all the time. We have applications all the time for MBAMIssion, but we make sure that we are meeting certain criteria in terms of our consultant pool, because we want to make sure that we're providing our clients the very best services and obviously the very best expertise. So our applicant pool here at MBAMIssion, we get quite a few applications, but we make sure to keep a small team to provide the very best service for our clients. Important to remember, I already mentioned it a few times, our website, we're already working for you. We have events year-round. We have guides, free guides. Please use them all over the website, and a blog that is updated daily. Check those things out. Check out those resources. You're obviously already on this video, which is fantastic. Make sure to check those make sure to check those other resources out. We are the highest rated firm on GMAT Club, where you're watching this video, and we are ranked with 250 verified reviews out there and counting. We have so many reviews by our clients. Please check out those reviews, get a sense of who we are and the work that we do. We are the only admissions consulting firm recommended by Manhattan Prep. So think about that as well. You've probably worked with Manhattan Prep or Kaplan. We're the only firm out there that is recommended by those GMAT preparation companies. Many opportunities to try us. Like I said, we have events, we have our guides, insider guides, interview primers, admissions guides, free career primers, in addition to some financing advice through M7, our financial free student loan guide, and free consultations. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to sign up for a half-hour consultation with myself or another consultant, one of my colleagues. And some new interview services that we have out there. Some free interview primers, some mock interview sessions. We have the Wharton team-based discussion simulation, which I highly recommend, where we actually put you in a online simulation of what you'll be facing in the Wharton interview. And then the HBS mock interview and post-interview reflection support service. Just a few of our selected team members here. I should mention Jeremy Scheinwald, who is our president, our founder, Darden grad, former speechwriter, and the author of the Complete Start to Finish Guide, which is updated every year. Jeremy has assembled this great team of consultants, all of my colleagues and myself, and you can see just a few of our bios. I highly encourage you to check out our team page on our website, where you can read all about every one of us as you're thinking about working with MBAMIssion. And again, just a few quick links for you to check out as you're thinking through that. You can pause the video right here if you'd like to look at some of these links. And again, on our website, check out those free guides, the free resources, so important. My name is John Sisk. With MBAMIssion, I can always be reached at my email address, john.sisk@mbamission.com. So please feel free to reach out if you ever want a free consultation or any other advice, and we can go from there.